covering the stories that impact your life, your town, your state, and your future. This is the Means Report with your host, Brad Means.
Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to the Means Report. We appreciate you spending part of your day with us. And yes, we are continuing to try to inform you, the voter, so that you'll have all the issues and candidates' platforms well in hand when you go to the polls or when you perhaps cast that absentee or mail-in ballot. And we are going to do it with our in-house political expert, if you will, Dr. Craig Albert, talking about the race for the White House, the Supreme Court nomination process, how secure will our elections be, all of those issues and more to be tackled over the course of the next 22 minutes or so. And Dr. Craig Albert from Augusta University, thank you so much for lending your political science expertise to us. We appreciate it, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Let's just start, I guess. We'll try to start in chronological order. I'm sure we won't stick with it, but if we do that, then we'll go back to the most recent event, which was the vice presidential debate on Wednesday night. What did you think of the vice presidential debate, and does that debate matter?
I think it was a good debate. I think it was much more traditional than the first presidential debate that we had. Again, as a political scientist, I'm a little disappointed that there still was not as much policy initiatives discussed and outlined as much as I would like there to be. So for people that are really on the fence or still don't know for whom they're going to vote, really laying out those policies in detail and how they're going to achieve the policy is what I was looking for, not just as a political scientist, but as a voter as well. And so I thought that was lacking. And that's tended to been the trajectory the past few presidential cycles, that there's not a lot of policy initiatives really given out in detail. So that unfortunately seems to be where we're heading and how it's going to play out for the next few presidential cycles as well.
Didn't you find I'm sorry, Craig, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's interesting to see this time if the vice presidential debates will have an impact on people voting. I think it might, because those independents or people that are not traditional voters who might be fed up with both the presidential candidates might cast their vote for who the vice president's going to be. And I think that is particularly the case with Kamala Harris and those tending to vote on the left or thinking about voting for the left. They see Joe Biden as a transitional president candidate, whereas vice presidential candidate nominee Kamala Harris would be the more progressive candidate, and that they might be seeing to set her up to be the next presidential candidate in the next presidential cycle. So it might have an impact in that they're going to vote for Kamala Harris versus voting for Vice President Joe Biden.
Wasn't it frustrating, though, when the moderator would ask a question, and both candidates would do this, they just would not even acknowledge the subject matter of the question and would use their 2 minutes to just go off on another point?
You know, as a professor, that's one of the most annoying aspects of seeing these debates, is that they just don't answer the questions whatsoever. They'll pivot, they'll tilt, they'll answer the question they wished was asked rather than the one that was asked. And that's unfortunate. I don't let my students slide on that. They need to answer the question that I directly asked to them. And I think we should hold our president and vice presidential candidates to the same standards as we hold college students towards.
Hey, what about President Trump getting the coronavirus? I sort of thought when it first happened that it would generate some sympathy for the president, and then that sympathy would translate to broader support. The polls don't show that just yet. In fact, it looks like, if you believe the polls, Joe Biden's lead got bigger after the president got sick.
It seems so, and there's so much controversy and conspiracy theories floating around there as well. This is the unfortunate aspect of the internet age we live in, is that we can't necessarily trust what's going on out there. The potential viewers don't know what side to believe. Some people are saying it's all fake. Some people are saying President Trump is acting like he had it just to get an increase in the polls. It's an unfortunate time with fake news. What we can be sure of is that President Trump having the coronavirus is showing people that even the most powerful people in the world are susceptible to this disease, and so that the United States should be taking it very seriously and taking it as a national security threat. The president has it, and that can't show higher threat to the nation's security than that. And so we need to start taking this much more seriously. And I think the president should be taking it much more seriously as well. And I think that's showing itself by the Presidential Debate Commission moving the second debate online right now.
Yeah, who does that benefit, Biden or, well, I guess the better way to ask the question is, does a virtual town hall meeting next week hurt the president? He seems to do well with live people.
I think it helps the potential voters because that might be more controllable, because of course you can mute and silence people if they don't answer the question properly or if they start interrupting one another. So I think that unlike the first debate where it was really chaos and we did not get a lot of insight from either candidate, this platform might give us the capability to really see what the policies of both candidates are. Unfortunately, I think President Trump said he's not going to do the virtual debate. So we'll see if he continues with that, or if the campaign, which I think the campaign should tell him to do it, because the people need to see the president as being in charge and being able to take charge in a debate, even if it's virtual online. So him bowing out is showing a little bit of presidential weakness, I think, and that's something that the Trump campaign does not want the voters to see.
Yeah, I should remind the viewers, we record the Means Report typically on Thursdays, and so you just realize that Dr. Albert and I are having this conversation on Thursday, the day after the vice presidential debate. Joe Biden, as it stands, Craig, has a 10-point lead in some polls. Does he need to debate anymore?
I think he does. He still needs to lay out those policy initiatives, which again, he hasn't been doing so. He also needs to lay out and answer the question about court packing and on the Supreme Court in general, what type of justice he would nominate to the Supreme Court. That's a huge question right now. And the policy's really lacking, and he needs to come out. Now, remember with these polls, we have to take those with a grain of salt, because the first question and those that are polled are asked are if you're a potential voter. And so that's only given us an insight to people that say that they are a likely voter. So that's leaving out anybody that says, no, they're not likely to vote, then they're not included in these polls. Most Trump supporters, or a lot of people that voted for Trump the first time, reluctant Trump voters, say they're not a potential voter. And so then the poll doesn't continue. So they're left out of that. So that creates a larger standard of error, or a larger percentage going for potential Biden voters, because the Trump voters don't necessarily always like to be polled. So we always have to take that into account when we talk about these polls. With that said, you're right. In almost every poll, Vice President Joe Biden has about an 8 to 12 point lead. But again, in 2016, Hillary Clinton had significant leads, almost leading up to the double digits, at least a month before the presidential debate, before the presidential vote. And so we saw how that turned out. So we can't rely and rest with these types of numbers. You need to continue to debate, continue to put out your platform, continue to be strong and vigorous and make your points heard, so that those independents show up for those reluctant voters, that they show up for the youth, the millennials, the Generation Zers that are going to be able to vote this time. They still are unconvinced because they don't see the policy differences between the two candidates. So I think if Joe Biden lays down his guard right now, that he's going to hurt himself, and you might see the same outcome of 2016, where people think that the Democrats are going to win, so they just don't show up because they think there's such a great lead by the Democrats. And that's a little bit of what happened in 2016. And if I were telling the Democrats what to do, I would say, don't let up. You have to keep going. Otherwise, people might stay home.
I haven't met an undecided voter in my life, at least since President Trump announced he was running for president. Have you met an undecided voter? I can't imagine there are that many out there anymore.
Those Generation Zers and the millennials, a lot of my students say that they're undecided or just fed up and they're not going to vote one way or another. And so they're undecided as to whether they think the voting process affects them and if it's important for them to vote. And that's sad to see. So it's up to the presidential candidates to really generate some type of appeal to these younger voters specifically, to show them why it's important to show up, that this matters, and that there are stark policy differences. I live chatted the first presidential debate with my students, and most of them said that they were so disappointed that they became disenfranchised by the debate, that they no longer want to vote in the presidential election, and that this was their first time being able to vote. And I think if political science students say that this is how the debate made them feel, what effects did it have on the general population? So I think both sides, and if I was a party person on either side, leading the national committees, I would make sure that they knew this and to really get out the differences in your campaigning and your platforms, because most people don't know the platforms and the policies of either side right now, and that's something that's going to hurt the country in the long run.
I guess this is more of a medical question than a political question, but do you think the president's apparent quick recovery from the coronavirus might cause some people to let their guard down about it, might cause them to not take as many precautions because they say, look, this 74-year-old man beat it pretty quickly?
It could, and we see that a lot on social media. People saying if the president got over it with his health conditions in 2 or 3 days, how bad can it be? I would like to caution everybody that the president has the most experienced medical staff in the world, the most powerful medicine in the world. 2 experimental regimens the president was placed upon that you or I, Brad, could not get access to, no matter how much money we had or what kind of power we had. That only goes to the president of the United States. So he is able to recover, or supposedly recover. He's still in that dangerous area where symptoms could reappear in the next 6 days or so. So he's not out of the woods yet. Let's be clear about that. And that's being said with him being on 2 experimental regimens and the greatest hospital in the world and the best doctors in the world. So let's not fall into the trap of thinking it's not dangerous. He has the best team in the world behind him, helping him. And even he had to be put on oxygen a few times during his hospitalization. So let's not forget that.
No, you're right. Good points indeed, Dr. Albert. I want to ask one more quick question, coronavirus related, if I may, before we take a quick break, and that just has to do with the prospect of a vaccine coming soon. The president says that its arrival is imminent. Does a vaccine before Election Day help the president? Does that mean more votes because he delivered it in time?
That could be the second October surprise, Brad, if he delivers a vaccine in time. Having the vaccine is one thing. Convincing the American population that it's safe and effective and to sign up to take it is another thing. So we'll have to see how the American public trusts a vaccine that's rushed out right before the election. I have a feeling that most people would see it, whether it is or not, as some type of political stunt, and there might not be that many people signing up to take it. But I think the president wants it to be released before November 3rd. So it'll be interesting to see whether that's the November surprise, if you will, if he releases it or it comes available on November 1st. And I think that's something that he really wants to push out.
All right, so there are the debates. There is the coronavirus, and oh yeah, a Supreme Court nomination is underway. We're going to talk about that with Dr. Albert and more when the Means Report continues. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Means Report. We appreciate you staying with us as we continue our discussion with Dr. Craig Albert, political scientist from Augusta University. Dr. Albert, let's talk about the Supreme Court nomination process. You have Amy Coney Barrett nominated for the Supreme Court. Is it important for the president's re-election chances to get that finished before November 3rd and get her on the bench?
I think so. And this is something that President Trump has been extremely successful in during his administration, is getting conservatives not just to the Supreme Court, of course, with 2 previous nominations and confirmations to the Supreme Court, but he has really packed the federal court system with a plurality, if not a majority right now, with conservative appointees. And so if I were advising the president, this is what I would be running on for re-election, is that the court system has been packed by conservatives. That's something that the candidate Trump in 2015 and 2016 wanted, and he has achieved this, but he's been reluctantly silent on really playing up how successful his administration has been in this. And that's something that could pivot some of the independent or undecided electorate one way or another, is his appointees to the federal court system. I think he's definitely going to push this through, and I think the Senate Majority Leader is also going to allow this confirmation hearing to happen and for a full vote before November 3rd. If it doesn't happen before November 3rd, one way or another, I still think that the Senate Majority allows it to happen before whatever transition of power may happen on January 20th.
Yeah, one way or another, she's going to be a Supreme Court justice, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Exactly.
Let me ask you about another thing that might generate votes for the president. That's this stimulus package that's being discussed as of today. The president at first said he didn't want to have any more talks about it until after November 3rd. Then he changed his mind, it looked like, and said, okay, let's do talk about getting everybody a $1,200 check. Let's try to push this through. Does that look like a ploy to get votes, or is that actually something that could help the president as well?
Both, yes. It is a ploy to get votes, and yes, it could help the president win re-election as well. Again, this is something that he has not been good about messaging or the narration of what he's done so far as president. If I were advising him, I would say, look, you need to tout the first stimulus package as being something that you did, that you created, that you passed. And then the second stimulus package, especially if it comes out a week or two before the election, this is something that the president can use to say that he understands what the average American person is going through. And he could even tie it in with him being sick with the coronavirus as well, saying he knows the pain and suffering that people that have had this terrible disease have had, the financial impact, what it has done to our economy. I mean, some of them are forecasting us to lose between 6 and 8 of our GDP this year, 6 to 8% of our national GDP this year. And this is something that the president could use to help his reelection efforts. But you're absolutely right. He's been reluctant to hold negotiations on this, but that could be a part of his messaging and his narration strategy. He likes to control the message, as you know. He likes to narrate everything according to how he wants it released. And so all of this could have been a ploy by him to convince the voter that he's the person they want in office for the next 4 years.
Dr. Robert, let's move a little closer to home and look at the Georgia Senate races. You know, Georgia has 2 Republican senators. So does South Carolina. Do you think, especially on the Georgia side, the polls showing those 2 races really tight, could a Democratic challenger take one of the Republican Senate seats in Georgia, or do you think it's just going to play out as it has in recent years and the GOP wins on both of those?
You know, many political scientists and pundits have been saying that Georgia is purpling right now, that it's going into one of those mixed states. I'm reluctant to say that. I still think it's solidly conservative, especially outside of the Atlanta metropolitan area. But here's where the issue comes to play. If Trump voters or people that typically vote Republican don't turn out for the presidential election, that affects all down ticket items. So if more people show up that try to vote for the president on the left, that means more down ticket items are going to be voted for on the left as well, which includes those Senate seats. So it all hinges on voter turnout. If Republicans stay home, especially those Republicans who don't want to vote for President Trump, if they don't turn out in great numbers, that's going to affect all local candidates and state candidates as well. So that's the one part that I think that the Democrats could win fully the state of Georgia, is if Republicans stay home.
Are we vulnerable to our enemies right now? I feel like I've been asking you that a lot lately, but now you have the president ill, the Supreme Court nomination process making everybody, making emotions high, and you have members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff whose job it is to militarily protect us being quarantined. Can enemies, is there an opening for them now?
They might perceive it as what we call a window of vulnerability or a window of opportunity to attack the United States' interests abroad or through terrorist attacks at home. But make no mistake, the military understands what's going on. It's vigilant. It's ready to protect the United States and the United States' interests. So the public should be calm and safe and assured and know that even though there are some high officials that have been sick with the coronavirus, it is not affecting the military. They have been handling this very well with self-quarantining for military members, for staying at home with their military bases. For military members, they are ready to protect the United States should anybody interfere. One thing I would like to say is that cyber attacks have been up and up tremendously from nation-state actors and from non-state actors such as ISIS and terrorist affiliates. They're trying to get into our systems, to get our information, to see where we're vulnerable. So now more than ever, I think Americans need to be protected from cyber vulnerability. So they need to operate good cyber hygiene. Don't click any links you're not aware of. You know, try to stay away from anything online that you're not used to. If it looks suspicious, stay away from it, because you have China and Russia trying to get into our systems, trying to get into our health systems, especially trying to get into our research institutions as well, to see if they can get some of the data on coronavirus and how to fight it and how to fight it better, so that they can be positioned on top of the United States when it comes to the vaccine and fighting the disease. So this is something that we all need to be aware of. Cyber attacks are up tremendously, as well as information operations and information warfare emanating from China, North Korea, Iran, and Russia, as well as non-state actors such as ISIS.
Well, that's great advice for the corporate and individual people who may be watching right now. Watch out for cybersecurity. Let me ask you a question about election security. Do you think it's safe to mail in our ballots? Should we worry about that? will we know who wins the presidency on election night, or will we wait for the mail-in items to arrive days, weeks later?
Those are great questions. I think for the mail-in, let me be clear. Everything is as secure as it possibly can be. So I want the voters, the viewers to understand this. The states handle this system. They've been practicing. They've been preparing for it. So it might be slow to count all those votes. So it might be a week or two before all those votes are counted. That's typical with absentee ballots and mail-in ballots from the military, from overseas, for instance. It takes a while to be able to really count those all and to say what candidate got the most. It's going to be hard to say, Brad, with how many people mail in versus show up. We know how many registered voters there are on election day. We'll be able to do that statistically to see how many voters that are registered actually showed up to the voting booth versus how many or what percentage might have stayed home and mailed in their ballot. So we can, through statistical measures, predict if we can expect 40% more voters to arrive in mail after the election day. And so that's going to be on the day type of calculations to see how many we know. We do know how many votes have already been sent in and counted in states that allow that. The issue is different states, Brad. This is why it's fun to be a political scientist. Different states have different operations for counting those votes, for when you can count a vote being mailed in, how early voting works, when you can do it, where you can do it, how you can do it. That's all handled by the party and state organizations. And so I would advise all your viewers to be aware that it could be a little process before we know for sure what side wins. And it could be a kind of a fight because it might look like one person wins in the mail-in ballot, but another person might have more in-person voting. And so it could be pretty contentious. It's 2020, so we should be ready for some type of contention. But be aware that our institutions are secure. They know how to handle this. The Constitution is sound, and it's able to take any type of confusion because of new voting protocols by the state. So it's as secure as it can be, and I'll be mailing in my vote, so I have no problems with it.
Yeah, just to hit on it one more time, you've already answered it, but you could go to bed election night thinking one person won, only to wait a week later and find out, no, the other person did.
Right. I don't think anybody will call it this year. So I know that the national media organizations and the local media organizations are having meetings about this now. They're going to be very tight-lipped on calling a state for one candidate over the other because it's just not going to be known how many votes are outstanding through the mail-in system. So I think what you're likely to see is a different type of wording it. So they might not call the state of Florida, for instance, but they might say it's heavily weighed in favor of one candidate or another. So I think we're going to see a different way of handling that process by the national and local media organizations. It should be fun. Again, it's going to be secure. The states have been working on that. Some states have figured out some issues in the past few weeks, and they have worked steadfastly to secure and fix those issues. And so I don't think anybody has anything to worry about.
Craig Albert, thank you for a busy half hour. All the best to you. We'll see you as Election Day gets closer.